What's good, YouTube? Welcome back to another Comptia A+ 1101 video. Before I get started with this video, I just want to thank everybody on this channel. Finally hit 1,000 subscribers. Now I know that's not really anything to be happy about. You know, that's not a whole lot of subscribers, but you know, it makes me happy that people who subscribe to me like my videos enough to, you know, subscribe, and hopefully it means these videos are helping you guys out. To all the ladies, to all the gentlemen that have subscribed to me, just want to say thank you very much. Definitely appreciate that. But anyways, let's go ahead and get started with this video. I kind of have to be quick with this video because I got dogs here waiting for me to take them out. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So this is going to be 2.3, compare and contrast protocols for wireless networking. So this is kind of a difficult section to go over just because there's a lot of information with these protocols. And for me, in my opinion, you know, I don't want to teach too much and confuse you guys. You know, there's a lot with these protocols or that are not really on the Comptia. So you know, it's kind of difficult to kind of gauge exactly what I should cover. But with that being said, I always recommend checking out some of the other people who make these videos. Professor Messer, for example, he's really good. He explains a lot of things. It's just, in my opinion, when I was studying for the Comptia exam, I learned a lot of stuff that I didn't use at all and pretty much just forgot all about it. So we're going to go ahead and go over frequencies. So what the heck is a frequency? So remember this: in wireless networking, frequencies refer to a range of radio channels that are used by the signal itself. I know that might not make sense right now, but when we get into channels and all that good stuff, you will see exactly what I am talking about. So I kind of like to think of frequencies as a scale in music. So if you don't know music, my apologies for making this analogy. I don't want to make things more confusing. Pretty much in music, you have a scale. For example, the C major scale is made up of all these white keys: C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. That creates the C major scale. When you play these notes, it's going to be the C major scale. So in this case, the frequency is the scale and the radio channels are essentially the notes. Again, hopefully that will make sense later when we go over channels. These individual channels are used by the Wi-Fi device to transmit data. So essentially the Wi-Fi device uses that channel to send data. And last but not least, in wireless networking, the frequencies used are 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz. Remember that. So before I move on to channels, what is gigahertz? GHz stands for gigahertz. Gigahertz is a unit of measurement for frequency. So it's a unit of measurement. Think of a measurement for distance, for example. If we measure in distance, if we're measuring something like, you know, we want to measure our monitor, for example, you know, we want to measure the width of our monitor. We're going to use a ruler and probably measure that in inches. Think of it like that. Inches is a unit of measurement for distance. Hertz is a unit of measurement for frequency. So when we measure something in hertz, we are measuring the vibrations per second. So for example, 1 hertz will be something vibrating essentially 1 time per second. So you can see this wavelength here. This is the vibration. And this is, you know, 1 time per second for 1 hertz. In wireless, for example, though, we use gigahertz. Gigahertz is pretty much 1 billion times. So 2.4 gigahertz is going to be 2.4 billion. And 5 gigahertz is 5 billion times per second. One thing to keep in mind that you should remember for the exam is the lower the frequency, the farther it can travel. Think of like a bass. You know, the lower the vibrations, the farther it can go. The higher the frequency, the less it travels. Also keep in mind for the exam that higher frequencies cannot penetrate objects as well. So they travel less distance and they cannot penetrate objects as well. So we will go over this when we talk about the different wireless standards. Just keep that in mind for now. That will be very important. This right here, I just want to kind of explain so nobody's confused about what the heck hertz is or gigahertz, stuff like that. But this part right here is gonna be important. So try to keep that in mind. All right, so now we get to talk about channels. Wireless routers can be set to use different channels. Channels used in 2.4 gigahertz are channels 1 through 11, and channels used in 5 gigahertz are channels 36 to 165. And that is using a 20 megahertz channel width. We will go over this again. I know it's a lot of information to take in. You might not know what the heck it means using 20 megahertz channel width. I will explain that to you in the next slide, don't worry. One very important thing, very, very, very important, and you will most likely see this on a test, is we need to use non-overlapping channels. That is best practice. It is like the rule of law, you know? If we use overlapping channels, we're not gonna get good wireless communication. We're not gonna have a good connection. I'm gonna go over what it means to use non-overlapping channels in the next slide. But this right here, you will definitely need to remember. You need to remember this for your Comptia. You need to remember this for the job, even your own house. I've experienced, some interference back in the day when I didn't know what I was doing. So very important, guys, very important. Let's go ahead and look at this chart. This chart is confusing, but we're gonna go over it in a way, hopefully, that will make this a lot less confusing. So the reason why it is called 2.4 gigahertz. Let's go over that first. Why is it called 2.4 gigahertz? So you can see this 2.402. Let's just go ahead and round down. It's gonna go to 2.4 gigahertz to 2.483 gigahertz. The channels use radio waves within that frequency range. This is the range right here. So that is why it is called 2.4 gigahertz. Okay, so next thing we have to understand is that each channel is 22 megahertz. So if we look at channel 6 here, this is channel 6, and the width of this is 22 megahertz. I don't think when I took the exam, I had any questions related to that, but very important to understand exactly what's going on here. There is something else I could bring up regarding the width, but it's not really important right now, so I'm not gonna really talk about it. But just keep this in mind. And within this 22 megahertz, this is the channel that is used to send data. So if you use channel 6, it's using this frequency range here to send data. That's all that's happening. The data is being sent within that range. Thing is, if two devices use the exact same frequency range, there can be interference between them, which will cause a degradation of the connection quality. So let's say you're on channel 6, and your neighbor is also on channel 6, and you are very close to each other. So it's gonna be you sending data, and then they'll be sending data as well, and then it will have some interference. If you have any other device in your home that is operating within this range, there will also be interference. All right, so let's go ahead and delete most of this so we could get to the last point here. As you can see, there is a clear overlap between some of these channels. So for example, this is why it's very important to use channels 1, 6, and 11. You don't want to be using like channels 1 and 2, stuff like that. If you do that, so channel 1 is here, but where is channel 2? As you can see, here is channel number 2. Let me see if I could use a different color for channel 2. So here is channel number 2. As you can see, there is a clear overlap here. So that is the reason why it's best practice, it's rule of law. You do not want to use overlapping channel. These channels are overlapping with each other. So if you use channel 1, channel 2, stuff like that, there's going to be an overlap and you will get a degradation of connection quality. That is why you should always use channels 1, 6, and 11, because as you can see, there is no overlap. So here's channel number 1, here's channel number 6, here is channel number 11. As you can see, there is no overlap between them, so there will be no degradation of connection quality. Remember that for the exam, channel 1, channel 6, and channel 11 should be used with 2.4 gigahertz. 2.4 gigahertz, as you can see, it does run from channels 1 to 14. There's different regulations and all that. Just remember 1 to 11. Don't worry about 12, 13, 14. In America, we cannot use 14. Channels 12 and 13 is used maybe under certain circumstances, but usually it's just channels 1 through 11, and that seems to be good enough. So let's go ahead and talk about 5 gigahertz. As you can see with 5 gigahertz, there's a lot more channels to choose from. You have 36 to 165. That is the channel range here. You can't really see it too much in this chart, but there will be some overlap. Obviously, you know, channels 36, 37, there's gonna be some overlap. Channels 40, 41, there'll be some overlap. So these are the channels you can choose from. With 5 gigahertz, you can use a higher bandwidth. However, when you use a higher bandwidth, you have less channels to choose from because of the overlap. As you can see, this is now using 40 megahertz instead of 30 megahertz. You remember what we said about megahertz in the last slide. So with 5 gigahertz, we're stretching this out essentially. So it's using more channels. So instead of 20, you will stretch it out to 40, for example. So it'll be from here to here, for example. This is 2.4, but you know, not a perfect example, but I just want to show it here because this chart has that 22 megahertz. But essentially, you're just stretching out the width. You're using more channels. If you do that, there will be more overlap and you'll have less channels to choose from. However, usually a higher bandwidth allows for faster data transfer rates, which is why, you know, some people might opt to do that. You know, with 40 megahertz, it's not really a big deal. 80 megahertz, you know, maybe not too big of a deal. 160 megahertz, as you can see, you only have essentially like a few channels to choose from, too. So just got to keep that in mind when you're messing around with 5 gigahertz. But that is how frequencies work. Hopefully not too confusing. Anyway, let's go ahead and talk about regulations. So every country has their own set of regulations regarding 802.11 transmissions. So this includes spectrum use, interference requirements, etc. As I said, there are really 14 channels for 2.4 gigahertz range. They're all spaced 5 megahertz apart. So if we go back, you can see this is 2.412. Number 2 is at 2.417. Between 13 and 14, it's actually spaced 12 megahertz apart. As I said, we don't really have to worry about those channels. We don't really mess with them, especially channel number 14. So as I just said, channel number 14, cannot use that in North America. I don't know about the other countries. Channels 13 and 14 is allowed under low powered conditions, but we usually don't even use those. So all we have to do is focus on channels 1 through 11. All right, so I don't know why Comptia keeps making us go over Bluetooth. You know, we went over this twice, I believe. So hopefully you're comfortable with Bluetooth. You know, if you didn't see my earlier videos, you might want to check that out. But I don't feel like talking about Bluetooth again, to be honest. One thing I might not have mentioned, I think I actually did, but Bluetooth uses the 2.4 gigahertz range. So might not be super important for the exam. Just something I'll bring up because we're talking about frequencies here. So as always, remember, Bluetooth is short range, up to 10 meters, and it removes the requirements to use wires. So we can be free. That is it for Bluetooth. Let's go ahead and move on to the next slide here. Okay, so we have 802.11 wireless standards. We will go over the chart in the next slide, but this is just for your note taking. You know, we have different standards use the different frequencies. 2.4 frequency uses these standards. 5 gigahertz uses these standards. We will go over these standards right now. We're actually going to go over it in this chart. Let's go ahead and talk about the standards here. So we have the standards 802.11a through 802.11ax. We do have to keep in mind the speed max of these wireless standards. I'm not too sure about the distance, but try to memorize the distance for the exam. But we definitely should also memorize the frequency that these standards use. So 802.11a, it's the oldest one. The speed max for that is 54 megabits per second, and it could go up to 95 feet. And it's 5 gigahertz. It uses the 5 gigahertz frequency. Around that time, they did come out with 802.11b, which is 11 megabits per second. Now, you're probably wondering why the hell they came up with 802.11b. You know, it looks a lot worse than A because it's slower. As you can see, it has higher distance. It uses 2.4 gigahertz. So remember in a couple of slides ago, I said that higher frequencies have issues. So the higher frequencies do travel faster, but they cannot penetrate objects as well. They also travel less distance. So higher frequencies have a problem with being absorbed into, like, you know, the wall and different objects, stuff like that. That is why they came out with 802.11b to pretty much get rid of that problem. 802.11b, however, does have its own issues though, like microwaves and baby monitors and stuff like that use 2.4 frequency, so there's going to be some interference with those objects. So it all depends on what you have in your house, how your house setup is. That would have depended on which one you use. For the exam though, just memorize the standard, the speed, and the frequency for sure. So 802.11g, that's gonna also be 54 megabits per second, up to 125 feet. But as you can see, it uses 2.4 gigahertz. So it's gonna be an upgrade pretty much from 802.11b. As you can see in this chart, you know, I didn't put 802.11a as Wi-Fi 1. I didn't put this Wi-Fi 2, Wi-Fi 3. That is because they didn't start naming it like Wi-Fi with a number until 802.11n. I could call 802.11a, for example, Wi-Fi 1, but you know, we didn't really do that back in the day. They just had these weird standards. But now, you know, we have Wi-Fi 4, 5, and 6. And they're gonna keep doing it that way. You know, it's much more user-friendly. You know, we don't have to memorize this weird 802.11 stuff. But hey, remember a few videos ago, I told you guys to memorize 802.11, we're gonna be talking about it. Here it is, 802.11. Every time you hear that, remember wireless, Wi-Fi. Anyway, so 802.11n, it's gonna be 600 megabits per second. This one uses 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. So you have an option between the two now. 802.11ac, which is Wi-Fi 5, a lot faster, as you can see, up to 115 feet. And it's going to use the 5 gigahertz range. 802.11ax, which is the newest Wi-Fi currently out, Wi-Fi 6, very fast, 9.6 gigabits per second, up to 164 feet. And this standard uses both 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. So we have an option with Wi-Fi 6. Very good, because we have the speed and we could use both frequencies. Just go ahead and memorize this chart. You know, the distance might not be as important, but definitely memorize the standard, speed, and the frequency they use, because you most likely will be asked about this on the exam. 802.11a, b, and g, they're not really used today. As I said, they're pretty old, so, you know, we don't really use these. If you had 802.11b and you wanted to upgrade to G, you can use the same equipment. So 802.11g is backwards compatible with 802.11b. 802.11n was essentially an upgrade from 802.11a, b, and g. As you can see, because it uses both 2.4 and 5 gigahertz, and the speed is a lot higher, so it was meant to upgrade all three of those standards. And last but not least, 802.11b. We kind of talked about this It has better range than 802.11a because it uses 2.4 gigahertz. The lower the frequency, the farther it can travel. And it also has less absorption problems. But however, there might be more interference if you have certain equipment like microwaves and baby monitors and stuff like that. It was not an upgrade to 802.11a. Think of it more like an alternative. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about MIMO stream. So this is probably going to be on the exam. So MIMO stands for multiple input and multiple output. So pretty much what this does is it utilizes both the transmitter and receiver antenna, which increases the amount of data that can be transmitted simultaneously. There is something called DL and ULMIMO, which we will go over in the next slide. But just keep in mind that all this does is it increases the amount of data that can be transmitted simultaneously. So for example, in the case of 802.11n, which utilizes 4 times MIMO, it'll have 4 transmit antennas and then 4 receiver antennas. So all it does is it increases the throughput. It's pretty much 4 times faster for both transmit and receive. Let's go ahead and talk about multiple user downlink and uplink MIMO. So, I don't feel like saying this. We have DLMU MIMO and we have ULMU MIMO. So the DL stands for downlink. The MU stands for multi-user. So UL stands for uplink. And of course, multi-user MU. So this is going to be downlink, multi-user, multiple input and multiple outputs. And uplink, multi-user, multiple input and multiple output. Very long word. With Wi-Fi 5 and Wi-Fi 6, these were introduced. Try not to get confused between this and regular MIMO. It increases the capacity and allows multiple users at the same time. Regular MIMO does not allow multiple users at the same time. There can still be congestion. All normal MIMO is it increases throughput. This increases throughput and allows for multiple users. So if you only have DLMU MIMO, this will allow multiple clients to receive data at the same time. And with ULMU MIMO, it allows multiple users to transmit data simultaneously. 802.11ac utilizes 8 times DLMU MIMO. So it only allows multiple users to receive data at the same time. It does not allow multiple users to send data at the same time. 802.11ax allows for multiple users to transmit data simultaneously and receive data simultaneously. 802.11ac is only DL. 802.11ax is both 8 times DL and UL MIMO. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about long-range fixed wireless. Now, what the heck is this big thing? Well, that's an antenna. So essentially what this does is it allows you to implement a point-to-point configuration. And what this is this is a long-range antenna. As you can see, it's kind of pointing this way. So there's probably something, on the other side somewhere, maybe another building or something like that. And it's just a point-to-point wireless configuration. So this is not like antennas used in wireless LAN configurations, stuff we have at home, stuff we use in businesses to give us Wi-Fi access. WLANs transmit data in multiple directions. This, on the other hand, transfers data in one direction. Highly directional, point-to-point. So with this, you have minimal signal absorption or bounce. Since this is used outdoors, there's probably not much in the way. So, I have never seen this implemented, but this was on the exam, so I gotta talk about it. But just remember, long-range fixed wireless is a point-to-point configuration. All right, let's go ahead and talk about licensed/unlicensed. Due to the finite number of frequencies available in the radio spectrum, regulatory bodies such as the government, for example, They oversee and allocate the use of these frequencies. So what do I mean by that? So, you know, AM and FM radio stations, when you're driving in the car or you're listening to the radio at home, something like that, they need a license because they can't just go ahead and transmit their radio signals whenever they want, anywhere they want. You know, they can't do whatever they want like we can do with 802.11. 802.11 is free to use by anyone since it's such a short distance. It's just in our house. You know, it's not really bothering anybody else except for our neighbors in the same building. But, you know, we usually don't have any problems with that. If you were to use an AM or FM radio station or even long-range fixed wireless solution, you will need a license. That way, they can ensure that if you're using the same frequency as somebody else, for example, you're separated. And it's just to avoid interference issues. You know, you don't want to have a radio station and get a whole bunch of interference because nobody will listen to it. So you pretty much just be wasting your time. All right, let's go ahead and talk about power. So wireless power refers to the transfer of electrical energy from a power source to an electrical load without the use of physical wires or cables. So how is this achieved? Well, this is achieved using electromagnetic fields or waves or a laser which generates light. Just keep in mind for this that wireless power technologies are more limited by distance than wireless communication technologies. The power is also regulated by the FCC. And I just added some note here. The rules for power cover point to multi-point. So point to multi-point is WLAN, and it also covers point-to-point connections, as in using long fixed range wireless. NFC was mentioned again. I talked about this before, so hopefully you're comfortable with NFC. We've gone over this a couple of times. Just remember they're popular for payment and authentication systems, and it requires the two objects to be close to each other, hence near field, near. All right, so last thing we have to talk about is radio frequency identification, RFID. So what the heck is RFID? It usually uses chips and readers. So this is like an RFID chip. You know how people always get obsessed over, you know, humans being chipped and stuff like that, being tracked? This is what they're worried about. They're worried about RFID on humans. So pretty much this uses radio frequency chips and readers. No batteries are needed. It uses radio technology. Popular uses for this technology are inventory tracking, tracking pets and animals, you know, stuff like that. There are two types of RFID systems. Remember this for the exam: active reader passive tag, and that is ARPT. And we also have active reader and active tag. So they're both active readers. The only difference is going to be the tag. So we have passive tag essentially and an active tag. So let's talk about what the heck is passive tag. Essentially with active readers, passive tags, the active reader transmits signals and then it receives the reply from a passive tag. The passive tag doesn't do anything until it has contact with the active reader. So as soon as contact occurs, then the passive tag will, you know, respond back. But the passive tag, other than that, it's not going to be doing anything. If you drive a car and, you know, your apartment complex uses active reader passive tag, you will have a passive tag, for example, on your windshield or something like that. Maybe you'll have a card, who knows? But as soon as you approach the entrance gates, the active reader will see the RFID passive tag on your car or wherever it is. And then your passive tag will then communicate and then the gate will open after that. So that's just one example. You know, there's other examples where this is used. You know, it's common to use these for gate readers and stuff like that. So what is active reader, active tag? So here's a picture of my boy Cosmo. It's my dog. What happens with active reader, active tag? So both the reader and the tag actively transmit and receive signals. This allows for two-way communication. Both are active. The reason why I put my dog here is because, you know, when he was younger, You know, he was a little mischievous and he ran away a couple times, you know, going on those adventures. I did not have a tag on him, but if I did, I would have been able to track him. This is where Active Reader and Active Tag is most popular with tracking animals. So for example, you could put the tag in the pet. Essentially, it's acting as a GPS tracker. So what this does is it receives location information from satellites, and it also transmits information. That's why it's called active, is because it's both receiving data and it's transferring data. Unlike passive tag, which only transfers data once it receives a signal from a reader. Anyway, that's pretty much it for this video. Again, I want to thank everybody for, you know, the support and all of that. I really hope these videos are helping you to pass your exam. But anyways, hopefully you all enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.